You've done nothing with your life, Uncle Gabriel. Ethan Cole's accusation cut through the modest living room as he stormed toward the door, leaving his Vietnam veteran uncle frozen in his worn armchair. What Ethan didn't know was that hidden in Gabriel's old wooden footlocker was a yellowed, blood-stained photograph from 1968 showing a young Gabriel carrying his brother, Ethan's father, through the jungle amid enemy fire, their uniforms torn and faces streaked with mud as a war correspondent captured the moment. Gabriel risked everything to save his critically wounded brother during the Tet Offensive. What haunting promise did Gabriel make to his dying brother in that Vietnamese jungle that forced him to keep his heroism hidden from his nephew for over 50 years? And why has he finally decided the time has come to reveal the truth about what really happened that day? If this story touched your heart, please comment, like, and subscribe to our channel. Share your own experiences of family secrets or unrecognized heroes that changed everything you once believed. The slam of the front door echoed through Gabriel's small house. He remained motionless in his armchair, the words still ringing in his ears. His arthritic fingers gripped the worn armrests, knuckles white. After several minutes, Gabriel pushed himself up with effort. He shuffled across the worn carpet to his bedroom, where an old military footlocker sat at the foot of his neatly made bed. He knelt with difficulty, his joints protesting, and ran his weathered hand across the scratched surface. The brass latches clicked open. The smell of old paper and metal polish wafted up a scent that always transported him back. Gabriel moved aside folded uniforms, medals and velvet boxes he never displayed, and letters tied with faded ribbon. At the bottom lay a manila envelope. His hand trembled as he extracted it. Inside was a photograph he hadn't looked at in years, yet had never forgotten for a single day. The image showed a young Gabriel, face contorted with effort and determination, carrying his wounded brother through dense jungle. Michael's arm hung limp, his uniform dark with blood. Gabriel's own uniform was torn, showing a wound on his shoulder he hadn't even felt at the time. The terror and desperation in his younger self's eyes was palpable. Gabriel traced his brother's face with a gnarled finger. "I kept my promise, Michael," he whispered. His gaze drifted to his bedside table, where Ethan's college graduation announcement stood in a simple frame. The boy looked so much like Michael's, same confident smile, same bright eyes full of promise. Gabriel slipped the photograph back into the envelope. 50 years was a long time to keep a secret, a long time to shape a life around a promise made to a dying man. He reached for his phone. Perhaps it was time for the truth, but then he paused, remembering how Ethan had looked at him today with disappointment, even disgust. The boy thought he knew everything about his father, the stories Gabriel had carefully crafted over the years, stories that painted Michael as the hero Ethan needed. Would the truth honor Michael's memory, or destroy it? Gabriel placed the envelope on his bed and picked up Ethan's graduation photo instead. The boy had his whole life ahead of him, a journalism career just beginning. Unlike Gabriel, whose life had been defined by a single moment in a distant jungle, Ethan had endless possibilities. "You've done nothing with your life." The words stung because part of Gabriel wondered if they were true. What had he done, besides keep a promise? Live a quiet life as a mechanic. Send anonymous money orders to help with Ethan's education. Watch from a distance until Sarah's death forced him to step forward. Gabriel slipped the photograph into his pocket. Some truths couldn't stay buried forever, no matter what promises were made. Vietnam, 1968. The air hung heavy with moisture and the scent of unfamiliar vegetation. 20-year-old Gabriel wiped sweat from his brow as he trudged through the jungle, his boots sinking into the muddy ground with each step. "Keep up, little brother," Michael called back, grinning despite the oppressive heat. At 22, Michael was only 2 years older, but he'd always been the leader, the protector. He'd enlisted first, and Gabriel had followed. That's how it had always been. "We've got 10 clicks before the next checkpoint," Staff Sergeant Reynolds barked from the front of the line. "Move your asses." Their unit, 12 men from different corners of America, had been together for 3 months now. They'd become a family of sorts, bound by shared discomfort, fear, and the dark humor that got them through each day. "Hey Cole," Private Wilson called to Michael. "Tell us again about that girl waiting for you back home." Michael's face softened. "Sarah's not just any girl. She's going to be my wife when I get back." He pulled out a creased photograph from his breast pocket, showing it to the nearest men with pride. "She's also having my baby." Gabriel smiled. His brother hadn't planned on becoming a father before leaving for Vietnam, but he'd been ecstatic when Sarah wrote with the news. Michael had immediately proposed via letter, promising a proper wedding upon his return. "You'll be an uncle, Gabe," Michael had told him, eyes bright with something Gabriel hadn't seen since they were kids. "Uncle Gabe. Has a nice ring to it, doesn't it?" The memory was interrupted by the distant sound of helicopter blades. The men instinctively tensed, scanning the canopy above. "Relax. It's one of ours," Sergeant Reynolds said. "Press is coming through today." An hour later, they reached a clearing where several officers were gathered with a civilian man carrying camera equipment. "Some hotshot photographer from a news magazine," Wilson muttered. "Probably never spent a day in real jungle." The man introduced himself as James Lawson. He had world-weary eyes that suggested he'd seen more than any of them guessed. He shadowed their unit for the rest of the day, his camera clicking occasionally. That evening, around a small fire kept low to avoid detection, Lawson sat beside the Cole brothers. "You two are actually brothers?" he asked, cleaning his camera lens. "Don't see that too often out here." "Couldn't let this one have all the fun," Gabriel said, nudging Michael. "More like he couldn't tie his shoes without me," Michael replied. With a grin, Lawson studied them. "Mind if I get a photo?" Brothers serving together, that's a story. They posed together, arms around each other's shoulders, trying to look tough but coming across as what they were, young men barely out of boyhood, far from home. "That girl of yours is lucky," Gabriel told Michael later as they lay on their cots. "So is the baby." "I'm the lucky one," Michael replied, voice soft in the darkness. "When we get home, things will be different. Better, you'll see." Neither of them knew then that only one of them would make it home. January 30th, 1968. Gabriel jolted, awake to the sound of distant explosions. Michael was already up, pulling on his boots. "Something big's happening," Michael said, his face tense in the pre-dawn light. Outside their tent, chaos reigned. Men scrambled for positions as their commanding officers shouted orders. The Viet Cong and North Vietnamese Army had launched a coordinated attack across South Vietnam later, to be known as the Tet Offensive. "Cole brothers, you're with me, Sergeant," Reynolds barked. "We've got separated units north of here that need backup." They moved out immediately, a squad of 8 men navigating through jungle that suddenly seemed alive with hidden dangers. The photographer Lawson had insisted on coming along, his camera hanging round his neck as he kept pace surprisingly well. "Stay close," Michael muttered to Gabriel as they advanced. "Something doesn't feel right." Gabriel nodded, gripping his M16 tighter. His brother had always had a sixth sense for trouble, ever since they were kids back in Ohio. The sound of gunfire grew closer. Through breaks in the canopy, they could see black smoke rising from a village in the distance. The squad moved faster, urgency driving them forward. "Hold up," Reynolds whispered, raising his fist. The men froze. The jungle had gone eerily silent. No birds, no insects, just the distant pop of gunfire and the squad's own breathing. "Ambush," someone whispered. The first shot came from their left. Then suddenly the air was filled with bullets. Gabriel dove for cover behind a fallen tree, Michael right beside him. "Reynolds is hit," someone shouted. Gabriel peered over the log to see their sergeant crumpled on the ground, unmoving. 2 other men were down as well. "We need to fall back," Michael said, his voice steady despite the chaos. "Find a better position." Gabriel nodded, preparing to move. Michael caught his arm. "On my signal, you go first. I'll cover you." Before Gabriel could protest, Michael sprang up, firing rapidly toward the enemy position. "Now, Gabe, go." Gabriel ran, zigzagging as he'd been trained. He heard Michael behind him, still firing. They made it to a cluster of rocks and dense undergrowth. The remaining men from their squad were scattered, taking cover where they could. The firefight intensified. Through the smoke and chaos, Gabriel spotted movement to their right, more Viet Cong soldiers attempting to flank them. 9 o'clock, he shouted to Michael, raising his rifle. They fired together, driving back the enemy soldiers. For a moment, Gabriel thought they might hold their position. Then he saw the grenade arcing through the air toward them. "Grenade!" he yelled, but there was nowhere to run. Michael's eyes met his for one frozen second. Then his brother shoved him hard, sending Gabriel tumbling down a small embankment just as the world exploded in sound and fury. The world returned in fragments, ringing ears. The taste of dirt, pain shooting through Gabriel's left arm. "Michael," he called, his voice barely audible even to himself through the aftermath of the explosion. Gabriel pulled himself up the embankment, ignoring the searing pain in his shoulder. The air was thick with smoke and the copper scent of blood. He found Michael lying where they had been standing, his uniform soaked with blood. Shrapnel had torn through his brother's chest and abdomen. "No, no, no," Gabriel murmured, dropping to his knees beside Michael. "Stay with me, brother." Michael's eyes fluttered open, recognition dawning slowly. "Gabe," he whispered, blood bubbling at the corner of his mouth. "You okay?" "I'm fine," Gabriel lied, fighting back tears. "Thanks to you." He pressed his hands against the worst of the wounds, knowing even as he did that it was futile. The firefight continued around them, but it seemed distant now, as if happening in another world. All that mattered was Michael, his big brother, bleeding out in the jungle dirt. "We need to move," Gabriel said, scanning their surroundings. Enemy soldiers were advancing. The remaining men from their squad were either dead or had retreated. With strength born of desperation, Gabriel hoisted Michael onto his shoulders in a fireman's carry. His wounded arm screamed in protest, but he gritted his teeth against the pain. "Leave me," Michael gasped. "Save yourself." "Not happening," Gabriel replied, starting to move as quickly as he could through the undergrowth, away from the advancing enemy. Bullets thudded into trees around them. Gabriel kept moving, his world narrowed to the next step, the next breath, the precious weight of his brother on his shoulders. He didn't see James Lawson, the war correspondent, emerged from cover nearby, didn't notice the camera raise, the shutter click, capturing the moment to brothers, one carrying the other through hell. Gabriel stumbled over exposed roots, nearly falling, but somehow kept his balance. Michael had gone quiet, which terrified him more than anything. "Stay with me," he pleaded. "Think about Sarah. Think about your baby." Michael stirred slightly. "Sarah," he murmured. "That's right," Gabriel encouraged, pushing forward despite the burning in his lungs and the fire in his shoulder. "You're going to be a father? Remember, you need to hold on." But with each labored step, Gabriel felt more of his brother's blood soaking through his own uniform. Michael was slipping away, and they both knew it. Finally, Gabriel spotted a shallow cave formed by fallen trees and overgrowth. He made for it, praying it would offer some protection while he tried to stabilize Michael. As he lowered his brother gently to the ground, their eyes met. Michael's were already growing distant, gazing at something Gabriel couldn't see. "I'm sorry," Gabriel whispered, tears finally breaking free. "I'm so sorry." Michael's hand found his, squeezing with surprising strength. "Listen to me, Gabe," he said, his voice barely audible. "I need you to promise me something." Inside the makeshift shelter, time seemed suspended. The sounds of battle had receded, but Gabriel knew they weren't safe. Nothing was safe in this godforsaken jungle. Michael's breathing came in shallow gasps. Gabriel had done what he could with their first aid supplies, but it wasn't enough. The wounds were too severe. "Listen," Michael said, his voice barely audible. "Sarah doesn't know how bad it is here." Gabriel nodded, still applying pressure to the worst wound. "She doesn't need to know, my baby," Michael continued, his eyes growing unfocused, then sharpening again with visible effort. "My child needs to be proud, of their father." "They will be," Gabriel assured him, fighting back tears. "You're a hero, Michael." Michael's bloodied hand gripped Gabriel's wrist with surprising strength. "Promise me, you'll look after them." "Of course I will, but you'll be there, promise me," Michael interrupted, more forcefully. "Promise you'll make sure my child knows I died, doing something that mattered." Gabriel swallowed hard. "I promise, and promise me." Michael's voice faded, and he took a labored breath. "Promise you won't tell them, how I really died." Gabriel stared at his brother in confusion. "What do you mean, don't tell them? I died saving you." Michael's eyes held a fierce intensity, despite the life draining from them. "Let them think. I died saving others. In battle, not just, my little brother." "Michael, that's not promise me." "Gabe," blood bubbled at the corner of Michael's mouth. "My child needs a hero, not just a brother who loved his brother." Tears streamed down Gabriel's dirt-streaked face. "I promise," he whispered. Michael nodded slightly, his gaze drifting past Gabriel to something only he could see. "Sarah will need help," he murmured. "But don't tell her either. Let her be proud." "I'll take care of everything," Gabriel vowed, holding his brother's hand tightly. "I swear it." A ghost of a smile touched Michael's lips. "You always, were the responsible one." His voice was fading. "Even though, I pretended to be." Gabriel choked back a sob. "Just hold on, reinforcements will come." But they both knew it was a lie. "Been thinking about names," Michael whispered. "If it's a boy, maybe Ethan." "Ethan's a good name," Gabriel said, willing his brother to keep talking, to stay with him. "Tell my child." Michael's eyes found Gabriel's one last time. "I was, brave." "You are brave," Gabriel insisted. "The bravest man I know." Michael's grip on Gabriel's hand slackened, his chest rose once more, then stilled. Gabriel shook him gently, then more frantically. But his brother was gone, his eyes staring sightlessly at the jungle. Canopy above. Gabriel gathered Michael in his arms, rocking him as sobs tore through his body. He stayed that way until approaching voices forced him back to the present danger. American voices. Reinforcements. Too late. As Gabriel gently closed his brother's eyes, he whispered, "I'll keep my promise. For as long as it takes." He didn't know then just how long that would be. The military transport plane touched down in Oakland with a jolt that matched the numbness in Gabriel's heart. It had been 6 weeks since Michael's death. 6 weeks of nightmares, of replaying that moment over and over, wondering if he could have done something differently. His arm was still in a sling, the shrapnel wound healing slowly. The physical pain was nothing compared to what he carried inside. Gabriel had rehearsed what he would say to Sarah countless times. The official report stated that Private First Class Michael Cole had died heroically while providing cover for his squad during an ambush. It wasn't a lie, exactly, but it wasn't the whole truth either. The taxi dropped him at a modest apartment building in Columbus, Ohio. Gabriel stood on the sidewalk for several minutes, gathering his courage. Finally, he adjusted his uniform jacket and walked to the door. Sarah opened it on the second knock. She was 7 months pregnant now, her belly round beneath a floral maternity dress. Her eyes widened at the sight of him, then immediately searched behind him for Michael. "Gabriel?" she asked, her voice already trembling with the knowledge that there was only one reason he would be here alone. "Sarah," he managed, his throat tight. "I'm so sorry." Her knees buckled. Gabriel caught her, guiding her to the couch as her body was racked with sobs. He held her awkwardly, his own tears flowing freely. "Hope?" she finally asked, pulling back to look at him with red-rimmed eyes. Gabriel recited the sanitized version he'd prepared. He saved his entire squad. He was ... a hero. "Were you there?" she asked. He nodded, unable to speak for a moment. "He talked about you," Gabriel finally said, "and the baby. It's what kept him going." Sarah placed a hand on her rounded belly. "It's a boy," she whispered. "I found out last week. I was waiting to tell Michael in my next letter. He wanted to name him Ethan," Gabriel said without thinking. Sarah looked up in surprise. "He told you that?" Gabriel nodded, realizing his mistake too late. How would Michael have told him that, if they weren't together when he died? Before it happened, he added quickly. He mentioned it. If Sarah noticed the discrepancy, her grief overwhelmed any suspicion. "Ethan," she repeated softly. "Ethan? Michael Cole? He'll need his father's tags," Gabriel said, reaching into his pocket. He placed the metal identification tags in Sarah's palm, closing her fingers around them. "What will I tell him?" she asked, her voice breaking. "How will I raise him alone?" Gabriel took a deep breath. "You won't be alone," he promised. "I'll help however I can." But Sarah was shaking her head. "That's not your responsibility, Gabriel. You have your own life to live." If only she knew how empty that life stretched before him now, how hollow every future plan seemed without his brother in it. "Michael was my brother," he said simply. "His son is my family too." What he didn't say was how completely his life would revolve around this promise, how every decision he would make from this point forward would be shaped by it. Sarah squeezed his hand. "Thank you for bringing me the news yourself, for not letting it be a telegram or a stranger at the door." Gabriel nodded, the weight of his promise already settling onto his shoulders. A burden he would carry for decades to come. The years passed in a blur of quiet routine. Gabriel settled in Dayton, close enough to Columbus to keep an eye on Sarah and Ethan, but far enough away to give them space. He found work as a mechanic, a trade he'd learned from his father. The rhythmic work of fixing engines soothed him, gave his hands something to do while his mind often drifted back to Vietnam. He lived simply in a small house he eventually purchased. The mortgage, his one indulgence, most of his earnings went into an account he'd set up for Ethan's education. With anonymous money orders sent to Sarah whenever she struggled financially, the nightmares never fully stopped. Nights when he jolted awake, drenched in sweat, Michael's face vivid in his mind. The VA doctor called it PTSD, prescribed medications Gabriel rarely took. He felt he deserved the dreams, the memories. They were his penance for surviving when Michael hadn't. Gabriel dated occasionally, but relationships inevitably faltered. He couldn't share the truth that haunted him, and without that truth, he remained a mystery to the women he met. Eventually, he stopped trying. Each month, he drove to Columbus and parked across from the playground where Sarah took Ethan. He watched from a distance as the boy grew, first toddling uncertainly, then running with the boundless energy of childhood. The boy looked so much like Michael it made Gabriel's chest ache. Once, when Ethan was 5, he'd spotted Gabriel watching and waved enthusiastically, the way children do with strangers. Gabriel had waved back, then driven away with tears blurring his vision. On Ethan's 7th birthday, Gabriel left a carefully wrapped package on their doorstep, a model airplane kit, the kind he and Michael had loved as boys. He watched from his car as Ethan discovered it, his face lighting up with delight. Years passed this way, Gabriel existing in the periphery of their lives, a guardian angel neither of them knew they had. When Ethan turned 10, Sarah called unexpectedly. It was the first time they'd spoken since the funeral. "He's asking about his father," she said without preamble. "I've told him the basics, but he wants more. Details I don't have." Gabriel's heart raced. "What can I do?" "Would you meet with him? Tell him about Michael, the good parts. I mean." And so began the carefully edited stories. Once every few months, Gabriel would visit, bringing photographs of Michael from before the war, telling Ethan sanitized versions of their childhood adventures, never mentioning Vietnam except in the vaguest terms, always reinforcing the official story that Michael had died saving others. A hero in every sense. Ethan soaked up these stories eagerly, building an image of his father as larger than life, a ghost Gabriel could never compete with. Nor did he try. It was enough to watch the boy grow, to know he was keeping his promise in his own way, even as the lie grew heavier with each passing year. In his footlocker, the photograph remained hidden, the truth buried but never forgotten. The call came on a Tuesday morning. Gabriel was at the garage, elbow deep in the engine of a '78 Chevy, when his boss waved the phone at him. "Cole, it's for you." "Sounds important." It was Ethan, his voice raw. "Mom's gone. Cancer. She's been fighting it for months, but didn't want anyone to know." Gabriel gripped the phone tighter, his world tilting. Sarah was gone. The woman his brother had loved, the mother of his nephew, had faced her final battle alone. "I'm coming," was all he said. 3 days later, at the funeral, Gabriel stood awkwardly beside 15-year-old Ethan de Boino. young man now was stoic, accepting condolences with a quiet dignity that reminded Gabriel painfully of Michael. Afterward, at the small house Sarah had eventually purchased with Gabriel's anonymous help, a social worker approached them. "Mr. Cole," she said to Gabriel, "as Ethan's only living relative, we need to discuss guardianship." Ethan's head snapped up. "What?" The social worker looked between them. "Your uncle would be the natural choice as your guardian until you turn 18. But he's barely even around," Ethan protested. "I've only seen him a few times a year my whole life." The words stung, though they were true. Gabriel had kept his distance, fulfilling his promise from the shadows. Now suddenly, he was being asked to step into the light. "I can take him," Gabriel said quietly. "Don't I get a say?" Ethan demanded. Later that night, after everyone had left, they sat across from each other at the kitchen table, two strangers, connected by a ghost. "I don't need a guardian," Ethan said. "I can take care of myself." "I'm sure you can," Gabriel replied. "But legally, you need an adult until you're 18. Where have you been all these years?" Gabriel sighed. "I've been closer than you think." What's that supposed to mean? How could Gabriel explain without revealing the truth? That he'd been watching over Ethan his entire life. Just not in the way the boy needed. "Your father asked me to look out for you," he said finally. "I've been trying to do that in my own way." Ethan's eyes, so like Michael's, flashed with anger. "Well, your way wasn't good enough. Mom needed help. I needed ... double quotes." He stopped, jaw clenching. "A father," Gabriel finished softly. "I had a father," Ethan snapped. "A hero. Not some mechanic who shows up a few times a year with old photos." The words cut deep, but Gabriel accepted them. He deserved them. "I'm not trying to replace him," he said. "I never could." A week later, Ethan moved into Gabriel's spare bedroom. The arrangement was awkward, tense. Ethan bristled at every attempt Gabriel made to establish household rules. Gabriel had no idea how to parent a grieving teenager. Circled each other like wary animals, connected by blood and loss. Divided by secrets Gabriel couldn't share, and resentment Ethan couldn't hide. "Tell me more about him," Ethan asked one night. Out of the blue. "About my dad in Vietnam." Gabriel froze, the familiar panic rising. "What do you want to know? Were you there when he died?" Gabriel looked away. "We were in the same unit, but were you there? Did you see it happen? How many times would he have to relive that moment? How many more lies would he have to tell?" "Your father died exactly as you've been told," Gabriel said carefully. "A hero, saving others." It wasn't a lie. Not exactly, but as Ethan's eyes bored into his, Gabriel wondered if the boy could sense the omission, the carefully constructed half-truth that had shaped both their lives. 3 years passed in a state of uneasy coexistence. Gabriel and Ethan developed a routine that minimized conflict but never bridged the gap between them. They shared a home but not their lives, connected by obligation rather than affection. Ethan excelled academically, throwing himself into his studies with single-minded determination. He joined the school newspaper, discovering a talent for journalism that shaped his college ambitions. "I got in," Ethan announced one evening, tossing an envelope onto the kitchen table where Gabriel sat paying bills. "Northwestern Journalism Program." Gabriel looked up, a mixture of pride and sadness washing over him. That's incredible, Ethan. Congratulations." "I got a scholarship," Ethan continued, a hint of defiance in his voice. "So you don't have to worry about money." What Ethan didn't know was that Gabriel had been saving for this moment since the day Michael died, that the college fund he'd built over decades would have covered any university Ethan chose. "I'm proud of you," Gabriel said simply. Ethan looked momentarily caught off guard by the straightforward praise. "Thanks," he muttered, then hesitated. "Mom would have been proud too." "Yes," Gabriel agreed. "And your father?" Ethan's expression hardened slightly at the mention of Michael. "I'm going to write stories that matter, make a difference, like he did." Gabriel nodded, the familiar guilt twisting in his chest. The ghost of Michael, the hero, loomed large between them. The myth Gabriel had helped create now, driving Ethan to a future built on half-truths. When Ethan left for college that fall, the goodbye was brief and awkward. No hugs, just a handshake and nod. "Call if you need anything," Gabriel said. "I'll be fine," Ethan replied, already turning away. Gabriel watched him go, wondering if this was the end of their story together, if his promise to Michael was now fulfilled. The boy safely launched into adulthood, but old habits died hard. Gabriel continued to keep tabs on Ethan from a distance. He subscribed to the Northwestern student newspaper, where Ethan's byline began appearing regularly. He drove to Chicago once a semester, watching from across the quad as Ethan hurried between classes, growing taller, more confident, more like the brother Gabriel had lost. When Ethan called, it was always brief and practical questions about tax forms, health insurance, the occasional reluctant request for extra money when scholarships and part-time jobs weren't quite enough. Gabriel sent more than Ethan asked for, always with a note, "Proud of you." During Ethan's junior year, he came home for Thanksgiving, bringing a stack of articles he'd written. "I've been doing some serious journalism," he said, a rare enthusiasm in his voice as he showed Gabriel his work. "Not just campus stuff, Real investigations. Gabriel read through the articles, impressed by Ethan's clear, compelling writing. The boy had found his calling. These are excellent, he said honestly. Ethan almost smiled. I got an internship for next summer, at the Tribune. That's great news. It's just a start, Ethan said, his ambition evident. I'm going to work for a major paper someday, cover important stories. Gabriel nodded, seeing so much of Michael in the determined set of Ethan's jaw, the fire in his eyes. What about you? Ethan asked suddenly. Ever think about doing something besides fixing cars? The question caught Gabriel off guard. I like my work. Ethan studied him with journalist's eyes, searching for the story beneath the surface. Is that enough, though? Don't you want more from life? More than keeping a decades-old promise? More than watching over the son of the brother he couldn't save? I have what I need, Gabriel said quietly. Ethan shook his head slightly, disappointment evident. That's what I thought. Ethan's desk at the Chicago Tribune was everything he'd dreamed of in journalism. School right in the middle of the bustling newsroom, surrounded by the clickety-clack of keyboards and the low hum of reporters on phones. At 20, the youngest staff writer in the city section, having turned his internship into a full-time position through sheer determination, Cole, his editor, called, waving him over. Got something that might interest you. Ethan approached, notepad ready. Margaret Chen was not known for handing out plum assignments to junior reporters. We're doing a special feature for Veterans Day, she explained. Personal stories, impact on families, that sort of thing. Since your father was a Vietnam vet, thought you might want to take lead on the Vietnam segment. Ethan hesitated. His father's service was something he knew about only through Gabriel's carefully filtered stories and his mother's reverent memories. He'd never really investigated it himself. Sure, he said finally. I'll do it. The assignment sparked something in Ethan, a hunger to know more about the man who'd given him life but never had the chance to raise him. His hero father, who'd died saving others in a jungle halfway around the world. He began with the National Archives, requesting his father's military records. Then he expanded to unit histories, action reports from January 1968, anything that might give him context for his father's service and death. The official citation for his father's posthumous Bronze Star mentioned heroic action during the early hours of the Tet Offensive but was frustratingly vague on specifics. Following a hunch, Ethan began tracking down veterans who had served in his father's unit. Most were dead or impossible to locate, but a few responded to his inquiries. Cole, brothers, one grizzled former sergeant said over the phone. Yeah, I remember them. Good soldiers, both of them, tight as only brothers can be. Did you witness my father's final action? Ethan asked. A pause. No, son, I wasn't there that day, but I heard about it. Whole unit did. What exactly did you hear? Another pause. Longer this time. Just that he died a hero. Look, it was a long time ago. Ethan encountered similar reticence from other veterans. They remembered Michael Cole, remembered Gabriel too, but seemed oddly reluctant to discuss the details of Michael's death. His breakthrough came when researching war correspondents who had been embedded with Army units during Tet. On a list of photographers, one name jumped out, James Lawson. Lawson had gone on to become a renowned photojournalist, covering conflicts around the world before retiring a decade ago. According to Ethan's research, he had been with an Army unit near Youve when the Tet Offensive began, possibly his father's unit. More importantly, Ethan discovered a reference to an iconic, unpublished photograph taken by Lawson during the early hours of the offensive. The description was tantalizingly vague, but mentioned brotherhood in combat and the ultimate sacrifice. Could this be connected to his father? Ethan's journalist instincts were firing on all cylinders now. He tracked down Lawson's contact information and sent an email explaining his project and personal connection. To his surprise, Lawson responded within hours. Mr. Cole, I remember your father and uncle well. Would be willing to discuss in person only. Some stories shouldn't be told via email. Ethan stared at the message, heart pounding. Uncle, why would Lawson emphasize the connection to Gabriel? That night, for the first time in nearly a year, Ethan called Gabriel. I need to ask you something, he said when Gabriel answered, about Dad's death. The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long that Ethan thought they might have been disconnected. What about it? Gabriel finally asked, his voice strangely flat. Were you there? Actually there? When it happened? Another long pause. Why are you asking this now? I'm working on a story about Vietnam veterans, Ethan explained, and I found someone who was there that day, a photographer named James Lawson. The sharp intake of breath was audible even through the phone. Ethan, leave it alone. What? Some stories are better left in the past. Gabriel's reaction only fueled Ethan's determination. I've already arranged to meet with Lawson, he lied. I just wanted to hear your version first. There's only one version, Gabriel said, his voice tight, the one you already know. But Ethan was certain now that there was more to the story, much more, and he was going to find out what it was, with or without his uncle's help. Gabriel's house hadn't changed. In the years since Ethan had lived there, same worn furniture, same faded curtains, Same sense of a life paused rather than lived. Ethan stood in the living room, waiting as Gabriel made coffee neither of them really wanted. You didn't need to come all this way, Gabriel said, returning with 2 mugs. Whatever questions you have, we could have discussed over the phone. Some conversations need to happen face to face, Ethan replied, not touching the coffee, especially when someone's been lying for decades. Gabriel stiffened, but said nothing. I spoke with James Lawson, Ethan continued. He told me about the photograph. What photograph? Gabriel's voice was carefully neutral, but Ethan caught the slight tremor in his hands. He wouldn't describe it specifically, said it wasn't his place, but he told me it showed what really happened the day my father died. Ethan leaned forward. He said I should ask you about it. Gabriel set his mug down slowly. Ethan, no more stories. Ethan cut him off. No more carefully edited versions. I want the truth, all of it. Gabriel looked suddenly older, the lines in his face deepening. I made a promise. To who? My mother. To Michael. Gabriel's voice caught on the name. Your father. Ethan shook his head in frustration. What possible reason could my father have for wanting the truth about his death kept secret? He died a hero. What's there to hide? Gabriel stood abruptly and walked to the window, staring out at the street where normal lives continued, unaffected by decades-old secrets. It's complicated, he finally said. Uncomplicated, Ethan demanded, his patience wearing thin. I've spent my entire life building my image of my father from scraps and stories. I deserve to know who he really was. He was exactly who you think he was, Gabriel insisted. Brave, selfless, a good man. Then what are you hiding? Ethan was nearly shouting now. Why won't you tell me what really happened that day? Because it's not my story to tell, Gabriel shouted back, a rare display of emotion. It was his last wish, his final request. Who am I to go against that? Ethan stared at his uncle, seeing for the first time the burden he'd been carrying all these years. But his anger and frustration overwhelmed any sympathy. That's not good enough, he said coldly. Not anymore. Gabriel turned back to the window, shoulders slumped. I've kept this promise for 50 years, Ethan. It's all I have left of him. Something in his uncle's defeated posture fueled Ethan's anger rather than dampening it. This man who had drifted through life, who had been present but never truly there, was using his father's memory as an excuse for his own failings. That's your problem, isn't it? Ethan said, the words spilling out before he could stop them. You've spent 50 years living in the shadow of a ghost, using this promise as an excuse to avoid living your own life. Gabriel flinched as if struck. Look at you, Ethan continued, gesturing around the sparse living room. No family, no achievements, nothing to show for half a century of existence. You've done nothing with your life, Uncle Gabriel, nothing. The words hung in the air between them, cruel and irrevocable. Ethan instantly regretted them, but pride kept him from taking them back. Gabriel turned slowly, his face ashen. For a moment, Ethan thought he might collapse. Instead, his uncle walked stiffly to the hallway, disappearing into his bedroom. Ethan heard the creak of floorboards, the sound of something heavy being moved. When Gabriel returned, he was carrying a manila envelope yellowed with age. You want the truth? He asked, his voice hollow. Here it is. He held out the envelope, his hand steady now. What is this? Ethan asked, suddenly uncertain. The answer to your questions, Gabriel replied. But once you see it, there's no going back. Are you sure you're ready for that? Ethan hesitated, then took the envelope. I've been ready my whole life. Without another word, he turned and walked out, the screen door slamming behind him. He didn't look back to see Gabriel sink into his armchair, head in his hands. Ethan sat in his rental car, the unopened envelope on the passenger seat beside him. Something held him back from looking inside, fear, perhaps, that whatever truth it contained might shatter the foundation upon which he'd built his life. Instead, he started the car and drove to his hotel. There, he called the number James Lawson had provided, arranging to meet the former war correspondent the following morning. Lawson suggested a quiet diner on the outskirts of town. When Ethan arrived, he spotted an elderly man in a booth by the window, a cane propped against the table. Despite his age, Lawson's eyes were sharp and assessing as Ethan approached. You look like him, Lawson said without preamble. Like both of them, actually. The Cole brothers. Ethan slid into the booth. Across from him, thank you for meeting me. Lawson nodded, stirring his coffee absently. I've been expecting this conversation for 50 years. Wondered if it would be you or your uncle who finally broke the silence. So there is something to break the silence about, Ethan said. Lawson studied him. You haven't looked at the photograph yet, have you? Ethan shook his head, placing the still-sealed envelope on the table between them. Why not? I wanted to hear the context first, Ethan replied. From someone who was there but, ISN single quotes T, ... emotionally involved. Lawson's weathered face softened slightly. Everyone who was there that day was emotionally involved. Son, some moments change you forever. He took a sip of coffee, gathering his thoughts. I was embedded with your father's unit when the Tet offensive began. Pure chaos. We got separated from the main force, caught in an ambush. Lawson's eyes grew distant. Your father and uncle were inseparable. watched each other's backs constantly. Ethan leaned forward. My uncle was there when my father died. Your uncle was the only one there, Lawson said quietly. The rest of us were scattered, taking cover where we could. I was about 50 yards away, trying to stay alive while doing my job. He tapped the envelope. That's when I took this. Almost didn't, to be honest. Felt like intruding on something sacred. Ethan's hand hovered over the envelope but still didn't open it. What exactly? Did you photograph? Lawson sighed heavily. Your father pushed your uncle out of the way of an incoming grenade. Took the full impact himself. Fatal wounds. He paused. Your uncle carried him through enemy fire, trying to get him to safety. That's what's in that photograph. Ethan felt the world tilt slightly. My father died, ... saving my uncle. Lawson nodded. Most selfless act I ever witnessed. But there's more to it than that. What do you mean? I was close enough to see them when your uncle found shelter. Close enough to hear some of what was said between them. Lawson looked Ethan directly in the eyes. Your father made your uncle promise never to tell you the true circumstances of his death. Why would he do that? Ethan asked, bewildered. He wanted you to be proud of him. Wanted to be a hero in your eyes, not just a brother who died saving his younger brother. Lawson shook his head slightly. He made Gabriel promise to tell you he died saving others in battle, which was true. In a way, he did save someone, just not a whole squad. Ethan sat back, trying to process this revelation. And my uncle has kept this promise all these years. At great personal cost, I'd imagine, Lawson said. Living with that kind of secret, ... it changes a man. Ethan thought of Gabriel's isolated existence, his lack of close relationships, the haunted look that sometimes crossed his face when Michael's name was mentioned. I didn't publish the photograph out of respect for your father's last wish, Lawson continued. Didn't seem right to contradict the official story when a dying man had asked otherwise. But I kept it, thinking someday the truth might need to come out. He nodded toward the envelope. That's a copy. I left the original with the Library of Congress last year. Sealed until 2028, figured 60 years was long enough for a secret to stay buried. Ethan stared at the envelope, understanding now why Gabriel had guarded it so fiercely, why he'd shaped his entire life around a promise made in a jungle half a world away. He's never told anyone, Ethan asked. Not that I know of, Lawson replied. That's a heavy burden to carry alone. Ethan remembered his parting words to Gabriel. You've done nothing with your life. The cruelty of that accusation now made him flinch. His uncle had done one thing consistently for 50 years. He'd honored his brother's dying wish, even at the cost of his own happiness, his own chance to be seen as the hero he truly was. Lawson tapped the envelope again. Time to see it for yourself, don't you think? With trembling fingers, Ethan finally opened the envelope. The photograph inside was worn at the edges, its colors faded by time, but the image itself remained powerful, even shocking in its raw intensity. A young Gabriel, face contorted with effort and grief, carrying his brother through a hellscape of smoke and jungle. Michael's uniform was soaked with blood, his face ashen but still recognizable as a younger version of the man Ethan saw in the mirror each day. The determination in Gabriel's eyes was unmistakable, the desperate look of someone refusing to accept the inevitable. Oh my God, Ethan whispered. He stared at the photograph, absorbing details he'd never known about either man. His father's hand gripping Gabriel's uniform, the wound on Gabriel's own shoulder, ignored in the desperate effort to save his brother. The scene captured the essence of brotherhood, sacrifice, and love in one haunting frame. This was the truth he'd been seeking his entire life, the reality behind the myth he'd constructed of his heroic father. The revelation wasn't that his father wasn't a hero, it was that heroism took forms he hadn't understood. Ethan drove aimlessly after leaving Lawson, the photograph on the seat beside him. His mind raced with implications, with revised histories, with a growing sense of shame at how he'd treated Gabriel. All those years, his uncle had kept this secret, allowing Ethan to believe in a version of his father that Michael himself had wanted preserved. Gabriel had sacrificed not just the recognition he deserved for trying to save his brother, but any chance at a closer relationship with Ethan. You've done nothing with your life. The cruel words echoed in Ethan's mind. How wrong he had been. Gabriel had dedicated his life to honoring his brother's final wish, a wish made for Ethan's benefit. He pulled over at a scenic overlook, needing space to think. The photograph seemed to burn through the envelope now, demanding acknowledgement. His father had been willing to die for his brother, and his uncle had been willing to live a half-life to protect his father's legacy. What kind of man did that make Ethan, who had pursued his own ambitions with little thought for either man's sacrifice? As a journalist, Ethan had built his career on uncovering truth, but this truth had been there all along, hidden in plain sight in his uncle's quiet existence. In the careful way Gabriel spoke of Michael, in the absence of any life that didn't somehow connect back to his promise. Ethan had judged Gabriel harshly for having no apparent achievements, no family of his own, no legacy to leave behind. But his uncle's legacy was sitting right here in this Ethan himself. The nephew Gabriel had watched over from a distance, then up close. Always careful never to tarnish Michael's memory. He thought back to his childhood, To the anonymous gifts that would appear on birthdays and Christmas, to the college fund that had mysteriously contained more money than his mother could have saved. To Gabriel's insistence on living nearby after Sarah died, had his uncle been supporting them, all along, another secret kept to preserve Michael's role as provider and protector, even in death. The weight of these revelations pressed on Ethan's chest. He had built his life on a foundation of half-truths, constructing his identity around being the son of a war hero, but the real heroism had been quieter, less dramatic, a lifetime of sacrifice, not a single dramatic moment. His father had died saving one person, not many, but that person had devoted his life to honoring that sacrifice, and Ethan had thrown it in his face. The sun was setting as Ethan finally turned the car around. He knew where he needed to go. Gabriel sat in the growing darkness, not bothering to turn on the lights. The old footlocker lay open before him, its contents spread across the floor, tangible remnants of a life interrupted half a century ago. His Bronze Star for Valor, awarded for actions that day but never displayed. Letters from Michael to Sarah that Gabriel had kept safe, sharing only selected passages with Ethan over the years. A worn compass that had guided them through the jungle. Dog tags he'd kept as a duplicate set of Michael's, the originals given to Sarah. 50 years of memories, preserved like insects in amber. The front door opened quietly. Gabriel didn't look up, recognizing Ethan's footsteps. "I saw the photograph," Ethan said, standing in the doorway of the bedroom. Gabriel nodded, still not looking at his nephew. "Then you know. Why didn't you ever tell me?" Ethan's voice was softer than Gabriel had ever heard it. "I promised him I wouldn't." "But why would he ask that of you? Why would it matter how he died?" Gabriel finally looked up, his eyes reflecting decades of carried pain. He knew Sarah was pregnant. His last thoughts were of Youth, a child he'd never meet. "He wanted you to have a father you could be proud of. But I would have been proud knowing he died saving his brother," Ethan protested. "Michael didn't see it that way," he said. Gabriel's voice caught. "He said dying to save just his little brother wasn't enough, that you deserved a bigger hero." Ethan stepped into the room, the photograph in his hand. "Say you let everyone believe he died saving his entire unit. It wasn't a complete lie. He was providing covering fire for the squad when we got separated." Gabriel looked down at the items scattered around him. The official report was vague enough to allow for interpretation. "And you've kept this secret all this time?" Ethan's voice held wonder rather than accusation. "Even when it meant I thought less of you?" Gabriel shrugged slightly. "It was my promise to keep." Ethan knelt beside the footlocker, picking up the Bronze Star. "You were awarded this? For trying to save him? For carrying him through enemy fire?" Gabriel's voice was distant. "I never felt I deserved it. I couldn't save him." "You did save him, in a way," Ethan said quietly. "You preserved his memory exactly as he wanted." Their eyes met, understanding passing between them for perhaps the first time. "It was you, wasn't it?" Ethan asked. "The anonymous money for college? The extra support Mom always seemed to have when things got tight?" Gabriel nodded. "I promised to look after both of you. It was easier to do it from a distance." "Why?" "Because every time I saw you, I saw him." Gabriel's voice broke. "And I was afraid if I got too close, I might break my promise. Might tell you the truth." Ethan sat back on his heels, absorbing this. "All these years, I thought you were distant because you didn't care. I cared too much." Gabriel picked up one of Michael's letters. "I couldn't give you your father back. All I could give you was the image of him he wanted you to have." Ethan placed the photograph on top of the scattered memorabilia. "I said terrible things to you yesterday. You didn't know. That's no excuse." Ethan's voice was firm. "You've spent your entire life honoring his memory and looking after me, and I accused you of doing nothing." Gabriel looked at the photograph, then at his nephew. "Maybe it's time to let go of the promise." "What changed?" Ethan asked, settling into the chair opposite Gabriel's. They'd moved to the living room, the photograph between them on the coffee table. "After all these years, why are you willing to break your promise now?" Gabriel was quiet for a long moment, gathering thoughts he'd never put into words. "I've been thinking about it more and more lately, about what Michael really wanted when he made me promise. And what was that? He wanted you to be proud of him, to have a hero for a father." Gabriel looked up at Ethan. "But you're not a child anymore who needs a larger-than-life figure. You're a man who deserves the truth." Ethan considered this. "Do you think he would understand? If he knew you were telling me now?" "I think," Gabriel paused, choosing his words carefully. "I think he would see that keeping the promise shaped both our lives in ways he never intended, that what started as protection became a barrier." "Between us, you mean?" Gabriel nodded. "The secret always stood between us. I couldn't get too close without risking it. And between you and everyone else, too," Ethan observed. "You never married, never had a family of your own." "It wasn't just the promise," Gabriel said. "After Vietnam, after losing him, I came back. Different. Many of us did. It was easier to be alone than to explain the nightmares, the memories." "PTSD," Ethan said. "We have a name for it now. Names don't make it easier to live with." Gabriel gestured to the sparse room around them. "This was enough for me. Knowing you were okay, that I was keeping my word to Michael, it gave me purpose." Ethan leaned forward. Tell me about him. The real him, not the sanitized version. A small smile touched Gabriel's lips. He was brave, but not fearless. He was scared plenty in Vietnam, we all were, but he never let it stop him. Gabriel's eyes grew, distant with memory. He had a terrible singing voice but would belt out songs on patrol anyway. Said it kept the jungle spirits away. Mom never mentioned that. There were lots of things Sarah didn't know. Things I never told her because they didn't fit the hero narrative. Gabriel shook his head. Michael was human. He wrote her letters full of courage and optimism, but he cried some nights like we all did. He wondered if he'd be a good father, worried he might not make it home. But he was brave when it counted, Ethan said, glancing at the photograph. The bravest? Gabriel agreed. Not because he wasn't afraid, but because he acted despite his fear. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of 50 years of secrets gradually lifting between them. I've been thinking about what happens next, Ethan finally said. With the story? With the photograph. Gabriel tensed slightly. What do you want to happen? I'm a journalist. Instinctively, I want to publish it all, the photograph, the true story, the decades of silence. Ethan held up his hand as Gabriel started to speak. But this isn't just my story to tell, it's yours too. Gabriel looked surprised. You're asking my permission. I'm asking what you want, Ethan clarified. After keeping this secret for 50 years, what do you want to happen now? It was perhaps the first time anyone had asked Gabriel what he wanted since that day in the jungle when Michael extracted his promise. I want ... Gabriel began, then stopped, emotion catching in his throat. I want you to know your father as he really was. Human, flawed, but still heroic. And I want ... What? I want to stop living in the shadow of that promise. Gabriel's voice grew stronger. If you want to tell the story, tell it. The whole truth. Ethan nodded slowly. Thank you. For what? For being willing to break your promise. For my sake. Ethan reached across and squeezed his uncle's hand. I know what that costs you. Gabriel looked down at their clasped hands. Maybe it's time I stopped paying that cost. The Vietnam Veterans Memorial stood before them, its black granite surface reflecting the cloudy Washington sky. Gabriel had never visited before, despite living just a few hours' drive away. He'd never felt worthy of standing among the families of the fallen, carrying as he did the secret of his brother's death. But now, with Ethan beside him, he slowly approached the wall. Panel 35A, Ethan said quietly, consulting the directory they'd been given at the visitor center. Line 78. Walked silently along the memorial, the names of the dead stretching out in seemingly endless rows. Other visitors moved around them, some leaving flowers or small mementos, others making rubbings of names, many simply standing in reverent silence. Gabriel felt a tremor pass through him as they neared panel 35E. 50 years had passed. But in some ways it felt like yesterday that he had held his dying brother in his arms. There, Ethan said softly, pointing to a name inscribed in the polished black surface. Michael J. Cole. Gabriel reached out, his weathered fingers tracing the letters carved into the stone. The sensation was overwhelming, the tangible evidence of his brother's sacrifice, acknowledged here among thousands of others who had given their lives. Hey Michael, he whispered. It's been a long time. Ethan stood respectfully to the side, giving his uncle a moment alone with his brother. After a while, Gabriel beckoned him closer. He would have been so proud of you, Gabriel said, his hand still resting on Michael's name. Not because of what you've achieved, though that too, but because of who you are. I wish I could have known him, Ethan replied. You do know him, Gabriel said, not just through my stories or your mother's memories. You carry him with you, his determination, his sense of justice. I see him in you every day. Ethan swallowed hard, fighting back emotion. Tell me something about him. You've never told me before. Something real? Gabriel thought for a moment, a small smile forming. He was terrified of spiders. Biggest one in our tent. He'd be up on his cot screaming like a child. The smile grew wider. And he cheated at cards constantly. Had an extra ace sewn into the lining of his jacket. Ethan laughed quietly. Mom never mentioned that. She probably never knew. He was very selective about which flaws he revealed. Gabriel's expression grew more serious. But he loved her completely. Carried her picture over his heart every day. When he talked about her, and about you coming, his whole face would light up. They stood in silence for a while, each lost in thoughts of the man whose name was etched before them. Finally, Ethan reached into his pocket and withdrew the photograph. I thought we might leave this here. For him? Gabriel nodded, unable to speak. Ethan placed the photograph carefully at the base of the wall, weighing it down with a small stone. The image of Gabriel carrying Michael through the jungle now rested. Beneath Michael's name, the truth finally acknowledged, the promise fulfilled and released. I've spent my whole life trying to live up to a myth, Ethan said quietly, trying to be worthy of this hero I never knew. And now? Gabriel asked. Now I understand that heroism isn't always what we think it is. Ethan looked at his uncle. Sometimes it's carrying your brother through gunfire, and sometimes it's carrying his memory for 50 years. Gabriel's eyes filled with tears. He placed his hand on the wall one last time, a final goodbye to the brother he had lost and found again in so many ways. As they turned to leave, Ethan slipped his arm through his uncle's, a gesture of connection that had been 50 years in the making. "Let's go home," Ethan said. "We have a lot of catching up to do." Behind them, the photograph remained, a testament to brotherhood, sacrifice, and promises kept, and finally, lovingly, released. 6 months later, Ethan stood before a packed auditorium at Northwestern University, adjusting the microphone. Behind him, projected on a large screen, was the photograph Gabriel carrying Michael through the jungle, now seen by thousands since Ethan's feature article had been published. "Heroes don't always look like we expect them to," Ethan began, his gaze finding Gabriel seated in the front row. "Sometimes they're not the ones who die dramatically in battle, but the ones who live quietly with their grief, honoring promises that cost them everything." The article, titled "The Promise, A Vietnam Story," had won Ethan the Pulitzer Prize for feature writing. More importantly, it had sparked a national conversation about the nature of heroism and the hidden costs of war that extended decades beyond the battlefield. "My father died saving one life, his brothers," Ethan continued, "and my uncle spent 50 years saving my father's legacy, keeping a promise that shaped his entire existence." Gabriel sat straight-backed in his chair, looking more at peace than Ethan had ever seen him. The month since their visit to the memorial had brought changes neither man had anticipated. Gabriel had finally sought treatment for his PTSD, joining a support group for Vietnam veterans. He'd sold his house in Dayton and moved to Chicago, into an apartment just a few blocks from Ethan's. And most surprisingly, he'd started volunteering at a center for refugees, using his quiet strength to help others rebuilding their lives. "The truth is rarely simple," Ethan told the audience. "Heroism comes in many forms. Sometimes it's a split-second decision to save another's life. Sometimes it's a lifetime of quiet sacrifice." After the lecture, well-wishers surrounded them. Many veterans themselves who understood the complicated nature of brotherhood in combat. Gabriel accepted their handshakes with a new dignity, no longer hiding in the shadows of his brother's memory. Later, at dinner, they sat across from each other in a quiet restaurant, comfortable in a way that would have seemed impossible a year ago. "I have something to tell you," Ethan said, reaching for his phone. He pulled up a photo of a sonogram and turned it toward Gabriel. "Emily's pregnant. We're having a boy." Gabriel's eyes widened, then filled with emotion. "Ethan, that's wonderful news. We've decided on a name," Ethan continued. "Michael Gabriel Cole." Gabriel stared at him, speechless. "Is that okay?" Ethan asked. "Using your name?" Gabriel nodded, unable to speak for a moment. When he finally found his voice, it was rough with emotion. "I would be honored. We want you to be part of his life from the beginning," Ethan said. "No more watching from a distance. He needs to know both his namesakes." "I'd like that," Gabriel replied simply. They talked late into the evening about the baby, about Gabriel's volunteer work, about Ethan's next writing project. The conversation flowed easily between them now, the barriers of secrets and resentment finally dismantled. As they walked back to their respective homes, Ethan asked, "Do you ever regret it? Keeping the promise for so long?" Gabriel considered the question seriously. "I regret the distance it put between us," he said finally. "But no, I don't regret honoring Michael's wish. It was the last thing I could do for him, and now I'm learning to live for myself." Gabriel smiled slightly. "It's strange. Starting over at 72, not starting over," Ethan corrected, "just continuing the journey." As they parted ways at the corner, Ethan embraced his uncle, a gesture that had once been unthinkable, but now felt natural. "See you Sunday for dinner?" Ethan asked. Gabriel nodded. "I'll be there." Walking home alone, Gabriel looked up at the night sky, thinking of Michael. His brother would have been proud of the man his son had become, of the family he was building. And perhaps, Gabriel hoped, he would have been proud of his little brother too, who had finally found a way to keep his promise, while also finding peace. Some heroes were remembered in stone and medals. Others lived on in the quiet legacies they left behind. Gabriel had spent 50 years honoring one kind of heroism. Now it was time to recognize the other. What haunting promise did Gabriel make to his dying brother in that Vietnamese jungle, that forced him to keep his heroism hidden from his nephew for over 50 years? And why has he finally decided the time has come to reveal the truth about what really happened that day? If this story touched your heart, please comment, like, and subscribe to our channel. Share your own experiences of family secrets or unrecognized heroes that changed everything you once believed.